February of 1949, members of the Karen ethnic minority launched an armed insurrection against Myanmar's central government. Over 60 years later, the conflict continues, with more than a dozen ethnic rebel groups waging war against the army in their fight for autonomy. As the conflict escalates, civilians are trapped in the middle of some of the worst fighting in decades. I'm Fauzia Ibrahim. On this edition of 101 East, we travel to Myanmar, home to the world's longest-running civil war. Myanmar is at war. Some 60,000 armed men and women from 12 different ethnic rebel groups are fighting for autonomy against government troops. Caught in the middle are Myanmar's civilians. An estimated 150,000 people have fled Myanmar to seek safety in refugee camps in Thailand. Some have spent a lifetime behind barbed wires, waiting for a day they can safely return home. But the civil war continues, and the mistrust between ethnic leaders and the government is at its worst in decades. David Thakabau is a leader of the Karen, the largest ethnic minority in Myanmar.
They think that they are master race, and all the different ethnic people are, slave race. That is in their mentality.
David Matheson is a Myanmar expert from Human Rights Watch and has lived on the Thai-Myanmar border for almost 10 years.
We're in the town of Mae Sot on the Thailand-Burma border, and that's the opposite town on the Burma side. That's the town of Mewari, and you're seeing the end of the day's trade between the two countries, all these boats sending goods back and forth. An assortment of everything. It's machine parts, it's oil, it's whatever people in Burma want to buy. It's on the boats and it goes across. I think this is indicative of a pretty desperate economy, that people have to resort to things like this, what is essentially a form of smuggling. There you've got people crossing over there, and they're just migrant workers from Burma. Everyone that you see going across there knows that 20 kilometres further out of town there is a war raging. Most people don't really think of Burma as being the world's longest running civil war, but it is. It's been raging since 1949. In the early days it was all about the desire for independence, but now I think most of the reason that the insurgencies continue to go on further inside Burma is because of human rights violations. I mean, that's really where you get the armed resistance and the civilian support for the armed resistance, because of the behaviour of the Burmese military.
For decades, the Thai border town of Mae Sot has provided refuge for tens of thousands of Karen people. It's also where Karen rebel leaders coordinate their campaign. They are keeping a close eye on political developments in Yangon ever since Aung San Suu Kyi's release from house arrest last November. The opposition leader is trying to incorporate ethnic minorities in the push for political reform. But ethnic groups like the Karen say Myanmar's new government is unwilling to negotiate.
They still have this policy that they have to wipe out insurgency. They have to stop that. They have to change their mentality, The ethnic peoples, what the ethnic peoples want is federalism. And the Aung San Suu Kyi one is democracy. And the ethnic people needs also democracy, because genuine federalism can happen only in a democratic society. So we support her stand, democratic change.
But she must embrace the principle of federalism.
Federalism, well, she supports from time to time. She didn't say, it is federalism. Straight away, she can't do that under this oppressive regime. And what she said was she supported the ethnic cause.
Meanwhile, more battles are reigniting across Myanmar.
In the months after the November 2010 election, there wasn't just heavy fighting here, there was fighting that flared up in March this year in Shan State, and since June in Kachin State, up in the north. And the reasons for why the fighting has resumed in those areas after 15, 20 years of fairly stable ceasefires, there's one factor that binds them all together, and that's the failure of a comprehensive political settlement inside Burma.
To show us the impact of the recent fighting on Myanmar's civilian population, veteran Karen rebel Topo takes our crew across the border. He also brings his 20-year-old daughter, who was born in Thailand and has never seen the refugee camps.
TKVAM, KLLAM, Burmese SPTC. Nakene copy of water to Mukuya. Mukuta in the other Chumu Papi, that the Chatala Takla.
To reach the refugee camp just inside Myanmar and to avoid Thai border guards, it's necessary to travel on a small mountain road.
Later, Kubune, Tatutaya Kerakura, move the Meponda or Tatuya Kerako Patipapa, Tanikuda, but Wapu Pan and Linda, or the Tivat Kura, Heki Upura, Chita, the Heki Nura, you got a panaki, you the air, Tanikunia, the Heki, or the Cochetti.
This camp was established 7 months ago. Over 400 Karen people live here, surviving on food and health care from the Karen National Liberation Army, the KNLA, and from foreign donors.
Why did you move here?
Because fighting and afraid SPTC soldiers. Now the SPTC moved to her village, so she moved to the camp. If they stay in the village, the SPTC will take her husband who can heavy in the jungle.
Tàu ta khai niệm mà ta đi là ai vì thôi liền tàu ta phải có đi khai đi bảo là nông nghiệp nãy khi ta cái ta lại ta lo cái đi gì rồi đi ra đi chơi thôi rồi đang rồi lên là chưa này ai làm mai ta bảo rồi theo khắp luôn lên rồi ta tập đi thôi này để chỉ có được bao cái lúa này bao cái hilo ta lo bị mít hilo ta đi bao cái hilo này bao đi bị tiền nhà đi mà tàu ta chưa có được thế.
Đó là bộ phận mà to đi về nhà nó lên bậc khô này mình đi tập cọ là xí đỏ ở đó được tập tàu ở phá và cho cái mà nó ăn lợi Papa do me tea put it at the mall. You know, it's a got you plastic. Like it's my to let well. You call negative together. You had to get about. Then you're going to pay my $1 you do much and you bought a blue one.
Government troops nearby make it too dangerous to go any further into Myanmar. But up north, it's possible to cross the border by boat. This part of Karen State is controlled by the 5th Brigade of the KNLA. It doesn't take long before the crew encounter a group of 50 rebel soldiers on patrol. Some of these rebels have fought for more than 20 years in the jungle.
just a call a Apollo Q. Junior be a Cathy Louis. Let any photo is such Havio. Annie, the Bagula Bakwachim and Wa Baguli to Qua. But you do see to see or the lonely do chow. Only you cannot hide it to Pira. You may know we will kill your Baba. Let that to a car car hold it. You go back to China, think about the Chugabio. Only in Lamada.
But do a thought of the what I look for do a thought of you of one in your
Kadu a far puna at a huda go, the letter menyan. At a hair, paw, or the lot of duty. I read a clear like Charlie. I could tell her told you.
The KNLA protects the villages against government troops. In return, families are expected to send their firstborn son to serve with the rebel army. This border village shelters Karen people who fled from the Myanmar soldiers.
Guess what's our reclita? Don't be telephone of Pinna away. Let do that at a declare that I choose and away, Titula. No pin value way, put up more. No poo, with the part of wood suit in your volleyball, but still clearly at so suicidal. But the water did I had the wood of how we finish running or let the walk on it. Can you add Unigeni? Did I be your honey away? What I declared, look at Henry Law. No, head top log out of where Liverpool should do the wall, the part of quarter boots, hell should the play. No, feel better to clip a holiday, said the one in door. You moan that you didn't care any door. Let a part that about to pass up window. Did I have clean here with the careless? No pony with the careless. Of the car of where Liverpool about even lay Cabo Boulevard. So I get a while I hit a bit of birth in the party with a leg and knife in the jeep. Let that away my way. Not sure the church of the Lure are Saka, Lad do that will order. Nigga, Matthew will kill it all.
Take care, Sada, dead budget, Vinegar, Le Kill to Serni. I will get a wapola. Apa ole to se depan, alela paola, aheki da la to bejalu kle la nada perje, tapi me bombu. Whatever you are, our television panel, our television message. Le la kima was in a pagin.
Most Karen refugees fleeing the conflict end up in one of 9 camps close to the Thai-Myanmar border. In April, Thailand announced plans to send at least 100,000 refugees back to Myanmar in 2012. Since then, the camps have been sealed off to almost all visitors. But by traveling 6 hours over muddy mountain roads along the Thai-Myanmar border, our crew reached a camp in Mae Hong Son province. There are over 16,000 refugees in this camp. Most of them are Karen, both Christians and Buddhists. The refugees have set up 8 schools here. This one has over 500 students learning Burmese, Karen language and English. The headmaster, a Burmese political refugee from Yangon, shows us around.
In our school, this is the high school level. This is a 9th standard. After that, over there is a 10th standard. Please come on and you can the. Good morning, please sit down. Okay. So, English is very important for the refugees. Some of the students go to the medical trainees in the medical clinic, Some are they want to continue their study. Some are they go to the village. Some are they are go to the KNU. You know, say the soldier, and some are the administrative.
They will become active in the KNU, but they also will become active as a rebel fighter.
Yeah.
There's no problem for you.
Yes, because this is our belief. Because now we fight to the military regime. Also, they are our ethnic nationality or they fight to the military regimes. So, the same, the aim. And the second thing, they want a democracy also. They fighting for the democracy. But now we hold up the arms struggle for defense, for protect our people, who protect our nationality, for protect our futures there. If we know gun, they can make easily, like supporter, like said, you know, some said the rape case like that. This is our future.
But now, the threat of forced repatriation hangs over these refugees.
Thai government declared about over 2012 years, some of the refugees moved back to their Burma. So refugees worry about this information. We can get a democracy in Burma, so all ethnic people and the government see fires and talking each other for the peace. We have a peaceful at that time. We will go back easily. This time, not safe for us.
But there is another threat for Myanmar's ethnic people caught in this long-running war. Myanmar is the only regime in the world that still regularly lays anti-personnel mines. Both the Myanmar army and the rebel groups use them. Over the last 10 years, it's estimated that at least 2,500 people have been injured or killed. But with no official figures, experts claim it could just be the tip of the iceberg. Many of the victims are under the care of Dr. Cynthia Mong. She is Karen and founded this clinic in the Thai city of Mae Sot 22 years ago, providing free healthcare for those who manage to make it across the border.
Landmine is one of our prioritized area for not only for medical, also psychosocial issue. And then it affects loss of family, not only for the individual, also the family and the community. Because people used to displace a lot, and then after displace, they want to go back home, but they don't feel very safe to go back and work in their community. So it affects their livelihoods as well.
Etwa is one of the managers of Dr. Cynthia's clinic. She introduces the crew to newly arrived landmine victims.
I think many people from Burma have problem matter, like family or property or with a soldier, torture or injury, something like that. So that's why many patients arrive in outpatient department to receive the general treatment. We give medicine, we treat them, never get better. And then later we refer to counseling, and then later we know they have problem with the matter or something like that. So, I think I get out of that delay. So he asked a KNLA. So that area is controlled by KNLA. So, nên do what I'm Roger, then you do that. You can do that. Never. Không nhận hết qua thuê nữa mà không nhận away mình làm cái này nên tu bát ta trả lẽ.
Thì ta thì bao thì ta thì vàng mà nên ta người ta cứ ta mình ô vàng mình cứ để udah bekerja mau lagi game sebab kalau jadi tak terlalu.
Không nhận tam ta cứ mấy đứa này cái party pa cái mà làm phải cái lũ lệ không nhận là bây giờ bữa đó là phải cái lũ lệ này đó chạy lệ.
Ta bekerja pa cái mà bekerja ada ta bawa bagaimana uang pola bekerja pa cái mà buat ta bagaimana uang pola pertama dan waktu uang pola tahu gaji.
Despite the casualties, ethnic rebel leaders defend the use of landmines as a necessity of war.
KNU has to continue using landmines because it's a large area we have to protect, and places where we cannot post troops, we have to use landmines to discourage the enemy troops.
David Mathisen says atrocities are being committed by both sides of this long-running conflict.
We criticise the non-state armed groups for forcibly recruiting child soldiers. We're very concerned about reports of other human rights violations that the non-state armed groups perpetrate, including executing Burmese prisoners of war, using forced labour, using civilians to carry their supplies. There's forced relocations, there's extensive use of anti-personnel landmines, but by far the Burmese military perpetrate atrocities and violations of the rules of war on a regular basis, far more than the non-state armed groups do. But those non-state armed groups are just as bound by the norms of conduct in wars as the military is, the Burmese military.
The number of civilian casualties is growing, but despite the suffering, many think giving up arms is not an option for the rebels.
I think it is very dilemma for the current community because they feel that until there is no agreement, like true agreement, like ceasefire and then start dialogue. So without dialogue, putting arms is no question. So I think the dilemma among the different ethnic groups. So have to start dialogue.
But dialogue is still absent. Instead, the Myanmar army is stepping up their fight against different rebel groups.
Since the elections in November 2010, the Burmese military really have gotten around to what they see as unfinished business about crushing the insurgents. It's the big unresolved issue in all their political transformation in the past couple of years. Now, the international community see the Burmese government as now civilian, still quite authoritarian, but somehow improved from the military government of before. The way I would see it is that they haven't really changed at all. They've changed their clothes. You've got former generals that used to fight in these areas in their younger days, now in government and controlling the country. But the real pillar of that military system is the army. And the army basically want to crush these insurgencies militarily. They want to squeeze them, they want to destroy them. They don't want to negotiate with them.
We can still carry on this war forever, you know. But of course we have to look for peace, and that's why we open the door, we keep the door open to dialogue. We always ask for dialogue.
With no end in sight to Myanmar's endless civil war, the toll is mounting as government troops and ethnic rebels dig in. For the ordinary soldiers, and especially for the civilians, only more suffering lies ahead.
And that's all the time we have for this edition of 101 East. Next week, we're in Nepal, where a family rift is threatening the legacy of Sir Edmund Hillary, the first man to conquer Mount Everest. Until then, you can always follow the program on our website, podcast and Facebook. From all the team, thanks for watching.